Thank you very much, dear Ms. Bešić, dear Ms. Pejovic, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for having me here today. Actually, during the past 6 months, I came across the issue of human rights and police on several occasions. For example, I attended an OSCE-hosted seminar with police officers and prosecutors on the question how to handle cases of alleged gender-based violence in a victim-sensitive manner. And actually, I was amazed about the enthusiasm and the eagerness of the participants to share experiences and best practices and failings, and the readiness to learn from the experts. And I attended a workshop on the question how Montenegro should organize its higher police education in the future, bearing in mind that each police service needs its own philosophy and cannot rely exclusively on a broad range of seminars attended by a broad range of police officers in a broad range of countries. And I attended the meeting of the Regional Challenge Fund, at which the Police Academy in Danilovgrad received a grant for a project to further develop their training capacities for security officers, including private security companies. And my first meeting with the new Minister of Interior, Mr. Šaranović, in which he unequivocally committed to human rights as the basis for all police work. Ladies and gentlemen, human rights are inalienable rights of the individual before the state, rights which are enshrined in international human rights documents, in the national constitution, in national legislation, and in other documents. And that means that the state needs to respect the rights of its citizens, that is, the state must not violate their rights itself. It means that the state has the obligation to protect the citizens from violations of their rights, and that the state has to fulfill the rights of its citizens. For example, their right to health, their right to education, their right to housing, and so on. So when it comes to the police, it is in the first place about respecting and protecting the rights of citizens. And doing this very often, we know, under very difficult circumstances, and certainly more difficult circumstances than for a diplomat dealing with human rights issues at the international level. And I know what I'm talking about, because many years ago I was the German human rights officer at our permanent mission in New York towards the United Nations and negotiating international human rights documents. So action taken by a police officer is the most direct and immediate experience that the citizen has with regard to the authority of the state. And this experience, to a considerable extent, influences whether the citizen will trust the state and will feel protected by the state, and depending thereon, whether he will be ready to abide by the laws and other rules of the state. The citizen will make up his mind on this based on his experience, whether the police officer is a credible representative of the state, of its legal order, of the rule of law, whether the police officer actively protects the rights of the citizen, whether the police officer in all his approach, whether protective or repressive, respects the rights of the citizen, and whether the state is unwaveringly willing to sanction its officers in case they do not respect or even abuse the rights of its citizens. I'm glad to hear that in Montenegro the population hold their police in pretty high esteem, in higher esteem than many other state institutions, which can only mean that the police are doing many things right. And despite this, despite occasional reports that police officers are accused of inhuman and degrading treatment or even torture of suspects, that the authorities are sometimes slow or reluctant to react properly and according to international agreed standards to such allegations, and that as a result there is or seems to be impunity for wrongdoing of police officers. You know what I'm talking about. That highest-ranking police officers are dismissed or arrested because of alleged severe crimes, Also, most recently, when high-ranking police officers use abusive language, for example, against civil society. Now, please don't get me wrong when I talk about abuse. Innocent until proven guilty is also a key human rights clause. But this is not what I'm talking about. I speak more about the perception in the population. Ladies and gentlemen, what does it take to have or to get to a police service that lives up to the highest human rights standards? I think it starts with recruitment. Based on German experience, for the police service there are often candidates who are focused on exercising power, using violence, imposing themselves, and all this, as a police officer, with official authority. Maybe they are not the best candidates for the police service. As I said, I'm talking about German experience, but maybe this is relevant everywhere. Then it continues with training and police education. From the very first day, a human rights-based approach must be inculcated in the spirit of how police work is executed, with regard to the offenders, but also with regard to the victims whose trauma must not be aggravated by insensitive treatment by the police. And police officers must be trained well for their job in all aspects of their work in order to be able to promote a rights-based approach. Why am I saying this? In one of the countries where I served, police officers actually had no idea how to properly secure evidence of crimes. They knew for certain who the culprits were, but they saw time and again that the culprits were released by the courts precisely because the prosecutors were unable to present convincing evidence. So the police started to resort to confessions of the accused. And in order to obtain confessions, they started torturing the accused during the interrogation. Human rights violations because of a lack of capacity in securing evidence, but still completely unacceptable. Lack of capacity is by no means an excuse for human rights violations. And still, capacity building is an excellent measure of prevention of potential human rights abuses. Furthermore, teaching a human rights-based approach and all techniques for doing a good job is not something only for the first phase of the career. It requires lifelong training, because negative experience in daily work can delete knowledge and the personal conviction in one's mind, because new techniques and approaches and an even better understanding of good human rights practice require constant dealing with the issues at stake. And finally, it requires a police leadership and a political leadership that lead by example in what they say and in what they do. Leaders who do not relativize human rights for quick political gains or in order to quickly and radically clean up corruption, organized crime, or terrorism. Human rights are not negotiable. Sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, human rights seem to make the work of security organs more cumbersome and less effective because they impose limits on what the security organs are allowed to do to deliver on law and order. But deep down, I think we all know that a stable and peaceful and prosperous society can be built only when citizens know that they can rely on the state to respect and protect their rights, always, and not only when appropriate, as we say. Ladies and gentlemen, my country, Germany, is happy to be able to support CEDEM's work in this field. I understand that the grant we gave to CEDEM has yielded fruit. That is, that useful activities have been undertaken with regard to research and training. And I'm happy that this has happened in close and trusted cooperation with the relevant security institutions in Montenegro. I know it from my country. Ensuring that the state upholds human rights is a continuous process. You have never achieved it to 100%. All the more, I'm happy and ever more optimistic that also my host country, Montenegro, is on a good way in this regard. Thank you very much for your attention.